Range Passenger Rail District and the governor's office to construct rail service from Denver to Boulder to Fort Collins as a first step in Front Range passenger rail service. The other thing we have is just an informational update is we'll have a fiber update. Commissioner Garcia is very interested in that and seeing how that's going. So he's asked for us to give a fiber update. So we'll have that for June also. I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Okay, any questions for Herman? Seeing none, we'll move on to the Transportation Commission report. Ask Holly to give that. I was not at the last TC meeting, so.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me give this report. It was, I'm going to go through the most important stuff I pulled out, and then the rest is in the minutes. The legislative report was fascinating. That's what I was going to highlight. Thank you to Emily. And it was fascinating and discouraging at the same point. So the key thing is that, as you all know, the MMOF fund and the FASTER fund were reduced. CDOT's budget, I think, was reduced as well. I don't know if the money, if we're going to talk about that today. But she went through all of the bills and discussed which ones passed, but the most important things were the budget and taking the MMOF fund and moving it over into the general fund, taking the FASTER fund, moving it over temporarily into the general fund. And so that really reduced our amount of stuff we get to do at CDOT. And the other one I noticed, which was interesting, which as a commissioner might help me, is that all commercial vehicles now have to have mufflers on them or something to that extent. And that will really help when it says requires all commercial vehicles to have a muffler. That'll help when I get complaints. Now, if I can just get them to get rid of their Jake brakes, we would do great. So that is my report, and the minutes are very thorough in the package. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Holly? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our TPR representatives and partners update. We'll start off with Central Front Range.
Hey, good morning again. We haven't had a meeting since the last meeting, so I don't have a lot to report. I just do want to say the project that happened at 285 and Highway 9 in Fairplay, that turned out really great, man. That really helped the traffic flow through there. So appreciate that being done. That's all I got. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. Grand Valley.
Good morning, everybody. Rachel Peterson, Senior Transportation Planner, so staff with the Grand Valley MPO and filling in for Dana. I don't have also too much to report, but a couple big things are happening in the Grand Valley. Well, also our GVRTC, our board, is moved to Monday, June 9th. We also are doing the Fare Free for Better Air and running Grand Valley Transit from June to August for free. And then we're putting our Mesa County Safety Action Plan to work and applying for implementation funding. Yeah. And then one of the big things that we had was a big collaborative project called the Monument Trail. And we had a train breaking event for that brought out hundreds of people. And if you're ever in the Grand Valley and want to check out the Lunch Loops Trailhead, there's a great new path for people of different ages and abilities. And then also we are hiring for a transportation planner. This would be a new addition to our staff. So I can put in the chat if you know anybody who might be interested in this position. That's all. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Greater Denver, Ron.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. I don't see Councilor Byrd online, so I'll go ahead and give the report. On May 21st, the DRCOG board discussed a potential adjustment to the Transportation Improvement Program schedule to better align our next 4-year TIP with our regional transportation plan update process that has recently kicked off. The board also received an overview of the process and schedule for updating our regional multimodal freight plan. The effort will focus on updating the data and analysis components of our existing freight plan, identify kind of gaps, do a land use analysis for freight generators, and create a process around freight project prioritization and implementation for the region. And then finally, just want to remind everyone that Bike to Work Day is coming up on Wednesday, June 25th. Dr. Cog's Way to Go program encourages everyone to participate that can. This annual event provides a supportive environment for first-time bicycle riders and regular bicycle riders commuting by bike, and celebrate cyclists who take bikes to work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for your years of service with CDOT and all that you've done over the years. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Gunnison Valley, Vince. See you joined.
Okay, yeah, I had trouble with the link there for a minute. Well, we're moving right along. I think we got some preliminary plans done for long range and 10-year and all that. I know I just looked at a introductory letter and part of the initial plan and sent in a signature for that. The biggest thing we're still working on is MMOF and how that's all going to work out. So I'm interested in where we go with that at the end of the meeting. So the number of meetings we're going to be having are going to be cut back because all the planning meetings, I think, are taken care of until we have a new one. Thanks.
Thank you, Vince. Up next, Intermountain.
Thank you, Chair. Dana Wood, I am TPR. We have not met since April. Our next meeting is July 18th, and that'll be held in person in Frisco. I also did want to give one update on the Fare Free program. One of our RTAs, the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority, will be doing free fare in October and November this year. Those are my updates. Thank you.
Thank you. North Front Range.
Good morning. At our May 1st Planning Council meeting, we adopted the fiscal year 2026-2027 Unified Planning Work Program and the budget, as well as the 2025 Title VI plan. At the same meeting, we received a presentation from Heather Paddock with Region 4 going over the region's 10-year plan process. And we also held a 4 TPR chair meeting on May 30th to finalize the list for Region 4, which will be presented to the Planning Council meeting at our meeting this evening. And we are also still on the search for our next executive director. That opened up May 15th and will be closing June 16th. And we just appreciate Becky Carrasco as she is serving as our interim executive director until we hire a permanent director. And that's all that's happening in the North Front Range. Thank you.
Thank you. Northwest.
Hi there, Brian Sirkvenick here. Chair Northwest TPR, Mayor Frazier. Our next Northwest TPR meeting is July 10th, so a little over a month away. Biggest thing we're working on is MMOF. We have 3 projects that were funded a couple years ago. Walden, Steamboat Springs, and Winter Park all have projects. Apparently we're going to have to backfill those funds to help those projects along. We got 2 projects in our call for projects for this year. Those are probably going to be on hold until we figure out what's going on with the funding. Then we had our first scoping call for the design phase of the safety improvement project through Frazier on Highway 40 yesterday. So we look forward to that progressing. That's all I have.
Thank you. Pikes Peak.
I'm sorry, I'm a little slow here. I apologize. So it's been a quiet month. There goes my video. Okay. And I just wanted to say we're going to miss Ron greatly. And then also, we wanted to thank Michael Snow and CDOT Region 2 for their assistance in developing our revised MMOF program to address the state's rescission of the MMOF funding. We're presenting that to our board next week at PPACG, and then we're also having a Bike to Work Day station on the 25th, because the 25th is Bike to Work Day, and we're really excited about that. So those are my announcements. We're also getting closer and closer to getting that I-25 mess on Fillmore and Garden of the Gods shifted over to the different lanes. And so every day we get closer to having that project substantially complete, which is, my favorite term. So thank you.
Thank you. Pueblo area.
Good morning. So we had our meeting a couple weeks ago, and we had Diaxis, who is the consultant that was selected to do the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan, which was received because of the grant that the City of Pueblo got from the Safe Streets for All. And it was really a great presentation talking about their methodology of finding the different projects that need to be addressed throughout our community. And they're hoping to do a larger public outreach event in concert with our long-range transportation plan in July. So looking forward to that. Also, we should be kicking off our roundabout campaign. We actually already have some roundabout information. It's an educational campaign. The City of Pueblo is going to be installing probably maybe 5 to 6 new roundabouts in our community. And although we already have some roundabouts that have been existing in our community for a long time, we thought it would be worthwhile to have an educational campaign for new drivers and older drivers, just so they know how to safely maneuver a roundabout. So we have that campaign kicked off on our website. So I will put that in our in the chat. Also, we are also celebrating Bike Month and Bike to Work Day, and we actually have a really cool, fun bingo card. We did this last year, and we had a really good success with it last year, so we're doing it again this year. And it's one card with 2 different options for bingo card, and it's just a fun way to get the community out and just making sure that we're opening it up to anybody, so not just roadside gurus that like to bike 20, 30 miles a day, but other people who just like to go out for a recreational ride. So we're trying to make sure that we are opening it up to everybody. So looking forward to that. And also just working through, like everyone else, the MMOF changes and trying to make sure that our existing projects stay whole. And that's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you. San Luis Valley.
Yeah, good morning again, everybody. Vern Hersink, Chair of the San Luis Valley TPR. At our last meeting, we approved our priority project list, and we're meeting soon with the committee to score the MMOF projects. End of report. Thank you.
Thank you. South Central.
Good morning. So we haven't met since April. Our next meeting is July 24th in Trinidad. Our long-range plan is open for comments, and we have new buses being delivered tomorrow. So that's all I have to report.
Thank you. Southeast. Ron or Stephanie? Okay. He must have dropped off. Okay, Southern Ute, did we have anybody join? Okay, not seeing anybody. Southwest.
Yeah, good morning. We had our MMOF subcommittee meet last week, with the new allocations, and they're ready to make recommendations at our next TPR meeting. We have several transit agencies participating in the Zero Fare for Better Air program this summer. And just like everyone else, we haven't met since the last STAC meeting. So we'll have a longer report next month.
Upper Front Range.
Thank you. We have not met since, I guess, been March. We do meet immediately following this meeting today, where we'll be discussing the changes in MMOF funding and what we're going to do there. We're also going to be discussing the changes to the 10-year plan, as we've had to make alterations on that due to CDOT's new budgeting constraints. We did put all that together since our last meeting, and now we'll be altering it. But appreciate Heather Paddock and her team as we continue to navigate this and figure out what solutions we can come up with.
Thank you. Ute Mountain, anybody join?
Yes, this is Brendan Adams. Good morning. Just a couple of things. We're still working on our long-range transportation plan. We are really close now to an agreement on the contract, so hopefully we can get that going. We're anxious. We've got a lot of projects and things to do here on the Ute Mountain Reservation. And then the other thing is our safety plan. We're working on an RFP, and so that should be out later this month, early next month. So it should be available for the public. So that's about it right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Southeast, anyone back on Southeast? Okay. Not seeing anybody yet. For Eastern, we meet Monday for our PPR meeting. We'll be reviewing the 10-year plan projects, and we need to adopt a plan from the list we initially had. We have to cut it in half for projects we'd like to see funded with that. And with the help of Region 4, we have that list kind of narrowed down. It always gets difficult for our region to address our other state highways when we have the 2 interstates that are needing continual high dollar repair work and reconstruction work. It kind of drains our funding that allows us to work on all the other roads that connect our communities. But we'll be having that discussion on Monday, in addition to figuring out if we need to try to find other funding to make some of our MMOF funds whole for projects that have been awarded. And we're holding off on the one project that was applied for to find out where the funding's going before we award that project. Otherwise, just some of the construction is continuing in our area. The few projects we have, we appreciate that. So one last call for Southeast. Still not on. Okay. We'll move on to our federal highway. Is John on?
John is not on. This is Aaron Bustow.
Okay.
I do not have any updates. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any updates from FTA?
Morning. Yes, this is Emma Belmont with Federal Transit Administration. I just have one update. We have a bus facility and low or no emission grant program that's open now through July 15th. So if you have any needs for transit facilities or transit vehicles, this is FTA's biggest competitive grant program, one of FTA's biggest competitive grant programs. So I encourage you taking a look at it, and I can drop it in the chat if folks are interested. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for anybody from anyone? Okay, not seeing any. Legislative reports. Is Emily on? We're way ahead of schedule, so.
Yep, I'm on. Thanks so much, Chair. I'm going to just go through a quick set of slides to just make sure everyone's on the same page of where we ended up landing with all the different budget bills. I think everyone's tracking this, but just a quick recap of where we landed after session ended is never hurts. And then other than that, we are also currently tracking which bills are being signed. The governor's bill signing tour should wrap up in the next few days. So there's been few bills that have been vetoed, a lot of bills that have been signed. So we've been tracking that very closely as well, but I'll focus on the transportation funding bills. But if there's any other bills, as always, that you have questions about, I'm happy to answer those as well. Next slide, please. So the first bill I've talked about a few times, it's SB 25-257. This is the bill that reduced the funding to the 10-year plan, which a few of you have mentioned. So this bill reduced that general fund transfer that was planned for $100 million this year and $100 million next year by $69 million in FY26 and $49.5 million in FY27. And then did increase our allocated funding, general fund, in future years to hold us whole and satisfy the intent of SB 21-260. Of course, it's always preferable to have the funding up front rather than in future years, but that was something that a lot of other budget cuts did not have accompanied in terms of having that promise in future years. So that was one small silver lining in this bill. And then the same bill also eliminated the $7 million general fund transfer to the Revitalizing Main Streets program, which was not a request that came from CDOT, but that was something that the JBC had been contemplating. And so I know that DTD is working hard to implement this reduction. This is the only funding source for that program, so we will not be allocating funding in future years until we exhaust the small amount of funding that's currently left from previous transfers. So that's the biggest bill that we've been tracking this year in terms of budget cuts, but there's a few other ones as well. Next slide. Temporarily reduce the road safety surcharge. This one's been mentioned as well. I believe Heidi mentioned it. So yes, this reduces the road safety surcharge fee by $3.70 across all weight classes for 24 months. That's a fee that was created in FASTER in 2009. And it results in a revenue reduction of about $44 million over 2 years, starting in September 2025. Ending in September 2027, so it is spread across 3 different fiscal years. The bill primarily impacts CDOT. The legislation modifies the statutory distribution to hold cities and counties mostly harmless. There is a small impact, as you can see in this screenshot here from the fiscal note. There is in FY 25-26, there's an $11.4 million reduction. CDOT is absorbing $11.1 million of that. Counties $4 million or $0.4 million, and municipalities $0.1 million. And then of course that's distributed across all cities and counties, so it shouldn't change too much in terms of what was expected from this fee. Next slide. SB 25-264 cash fund transfers to the general fund. This is the one that I think everyone is tracking the closest, which swept the $71.8 million of funding from the Multimodal Options Fund. I don't think I need to go too much more into this because I know everyone's working hard to figure out exactly what this will look like for each TPR and MPO. But this is the bill that included a variety of different cash fund transfers, including the one from MMOF. Next slide. And then the final budget bill was one that came about very late in session, which was some good news on our end for transportation. So it is SB 25-320. And what that bill does is accelerates the bridge and tunnel impact fee schedule. So that fee already is planned to increase in statute every year for several years. And this year it was supposed to go up to 5 cents per gallon on special fuels, including diesel. This bill accelerates that fee and brings that up to 7 cents per gallon, which was planned in FY28, I believe. So it doesn't create any new fees, it just accelerates that planned schedule. And what that bill does is generates $28 million of additional funding for the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise over the next 3 fiscal years. And so we are working strategically to figure out how we can utilize this funding to minimize the impacts of the faster safety cuts to asset management. It doesn't fully even out, balance out. That other bill cut $44 million over 3 years. This one increases funding by $28 million, but every dollar counts to help keep us whole in this tricky budget year. So that's all of the transportation funding bills that we had. And then we're already starting to look towards next year, starting to explore what bill priorities we want to bring up in the final year of the Polis administration, and also anticipating another, and I guess we can actually close out of this. I think that was my last slide. We are anticipating another tricky budget year in the legislature. So what we did hear from a lot of legislators this year was that this was quote unquote the easier year and next year is the hard year. So of course that's a scary thing to hear. We've been getting a lot of questions about what people can do to help, and I think it's never too early to have those conversations with JBC members and your local legislators to make it clear what your priorities are in terms of the state budget, because it is anticipated to be another tricky year next year. But happy to answer any questions on anything I didn't cover. Oh, you're muted, Gary.
Yeah. Any questions? Not seeing anybody raising hands. So, all right. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to updates on what's coming for next year. All right. We're way ahead of schedule. All right. I guess we still have Jamie, seeing her pop on. So I don't want to forget the federal.
There's actually quite a bit going on federally right now that has impacts to the larger budget as a whole. Transportation is a piece of it, but at the moment, we're not the focus. So last week, the U.S. House passed the Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is the president's domestic policy agenda finance package. They're using a process called reconciliation, which means that they have a very narrow set of parameters that they are able to follow. Anything in the bill must involve funding and financing. This is a rule that's used in the Senate. It was introduced by Robert Byrd. And the reason they use that is if you only need 51 votes as opposed to a full majority of the Senate, because right now, neither party has the numbers to be able to get to that 2/3 majority. So right now, so it was passed in the House. The things that are so I'm sure you guys have heard of it, about it, Medicaid, immigration, etc. A lot of healthcare, a lot of immigration policy. The transportation policy, it still stands what I talked about last month, where they've added a $250 fee for EVs and a $100 fee for hybrids. That money will be collected by state DMVs, and then that will go straight into the Highway Trust Fund. This is the first time in 20 or 30 years that there has been a conversation about finding another funding stream for the Highway Trust Fund. I don't think this is projected to solve the highway funding shortfalls, but it is interesting that they're finally having conversations about how to get more money into that, because since 2008, we've had to have general fund transfers from the national budget to shore up the Highway Trust Fund. So that passed the House. It only passed by one vote. I believe it was 214 to 213. So very, very close. And now it moves on to the Senate. The president has let Congress know that he would like it on his desk before July 4th. They have a lot of work to do before then. So Senate and House were in recess last week for Memorial Day. Excuse me, I guess they must have passed reconciliation 2 weeks ago. It's all blurring together. Last week they were on recess, so this is the first week that the Senate has been in session, and so they are working on getting out. Each committee is working on putting out budget drafts. So yesterday we got a budget draft from the the EPW committee, Environmental and Public Works. That came out yesterday. The majority of their draft is to rescind the any unobligated funds that were in the Inflation Reduction Act or the IRA Act. That includes the $7,500 EV tax rebate that they had been offering nationally. So if you're planning on buying an EV, I would suggest getting it very soon if you would like to use the rebate. I'm still waiting on if the Commerce Committee, which is where transportation is housed, if they'll put out a draft today or tomorrow and let you know what's in that. When the EV fee passed, there was a senator in Florida who said he absolutely wouldn't vote for a bill that had increased fees in it. I'm not sure where he stands on that now, so I'll be interested to see what they decide to do about the EV fees, because experts have looked at it and $250 is considerably more than the average combustible fuel car uses and pays in gas tax. So it'll be interesting to see what that conversation looks like. There are a lot of concerns in the Senate, and I have a feeling there are going to be a lot of changes in the Senate bill, specifically around Medicaid. There's a core of Republican senators who are very concerned about the cuts to Medicaid. And if they make big changes to the bill, it'll have to go back to the House. And that's also a very fraught place. So it'll be really interesting to watch in the next 3 weeks, the next couple of months, to see how the two houses come together to find a bill that the president is happy with. We also saw something come out yesterday as well. The president introduced a rescission budget, a rescission package. The rescission package is intended to codify DOGE cuts. And I'm still looking through the text. I haven't seen anything transportation related right now. Mostly, I'm sure you've seen the headlines. It's pulling back NPR funding, PBS funding, and USAID funding. So those are kind of the big three things that are getting a lot of play right now. So there's a lot going on in Congress related to the budget and to funding. But this week, there's not a lot going on because we're waiting on drafts. So on July 3rd at our next STAC meeting, if we meet, I know it's right by the holiday, I'll probably have a different update for you. That said, I wanted to say yesterday was the 106th anniversary of the 19th Amendment being passed by Congress. The 19th Amendment is what gave women the right to vote. And I heard that on the radio and thought, I don't really know a lot about the 19th Amendment, which is embarrassing because it gave me the right to vote. So I just looked up just a couple of facts about it. It was first introduced in 1878. So what is that? 40 years they were working on it, which, you know, that's some passion. It was ratified. So before it passed, 20 states, including Colorado, already allowed women the right to vote. It passed by, there were only 48 senators in the Senate, which I don't know why, but that was wild to me. I'm so used to seeing 50. It passed by one vote. A gentleman from Tennessee, his mother had written him a letter and told him to be a good boy and vote for it. So he did, and it passed by one vote. Wisconsin was the first state to ratify it on June 10th, 1919. Tennessee was the 36th state to ratify it. So it became part of an amendment in the Constitution on August 18th, 1920. And the last state to ratify it was Mississippi in 1984. Not really sure what happened there, and I'm very curious. I'm sure there's a story there. So that said, it is Constitution Day in Denmark, but we're still celebrating the Constitution here. It is also Thank You Day, so please be grateful and polite to everyone while we're presenting at STAC.
Thank you, Jamie. Any questions for her? All right, not seeing any. We're still way ahead of schedule, so I think we'll go ahead and move into the statewide plan update. And if you need a break, just go ahead and take one when you need it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yep. So Marissa Gahan, Assistant Director for Multimodal Planning in the Division of Transportation Development. I'm going to be co-presenting this with Erin Willis today, Statewide and Regional Planning Section Manager. But if you want to go to the next slide, Erin. So first, this is a good timing after Jamie announced, wanted to start with some gratitude and thankfulness. And just an acknowledgement that this presentation marks over a year now of focused planning work. So it's been a year filled with hard work, lots of thoughtful outreach and strategic planning. I want to especially thank you all as STAC members for your partnership and dedication. You know, over this past year, we've truly enjoyed working with your communities, attending your TPR meetings, your MPO meetings, listening to the voices of your members, understanding your needs, and hopefully building plans that reflect your shared goals and values. So we'll be bringing the draft regional transportation plan to Upper Front Range later today, and then Eastern on Monday of next week, which means that all of the rural TPRs now have draft plans for your areas. So please continue to send us back any edits or comments on your draft plans so that we can get those finalized and ready for public review with the statewide plan, which we're hoping to put out in July. So with that, this presentation will update you about our recent public engagement efforts, including the telephone town halls and our public survey. And then we'll shift focus a little to talk about how we as a state can work together to fund the transportation priorities that we've identified over this last year as part of our long-range planning efforts. Aaron, I'll turn it to you to talk about the next two slides.
Hey, thank you, Marissa. So I wanted to give everybody a quick overview on the progress that we've seen so far. For one, our 2050 statewide transportation survey. As of when we submitted these materials, or when we sent these materials out as a part of the STAC packet, we had 1,400 respondents. I think that has gone up since then, and so we'll begin the process to begin to analyze some of those results here over the next week and a half. We have what we call a soft deadline for the end of the survey, which is around June 12th, but I can anticipate us extending that as we do some of our analysis, some of our initial analysis, and with some additional making sure we hear from every part of the state. So we'll do some of that additional analysis to make sure that we have responses from all parts of the state. So we'll begin that analysis process next week, and then adjust accordingly with some more targeted outreach to make sure that we hear from every part of the state. So moving on to the telephone town hall. The telephone town hall, some of the initial results, we have completed 5 telephone town halls. We have 3 more left. One tonight covers the kind of the general southwest corner. Then we'll do sort of generally it's kind of the Gunnison Valley-ish TPR on Monday, and then we'll complete the second half, the southern half of the Denver metro area next Thursday. So we've seen some fairly good results in terms of both peak attendance and what I like is the average minutes per each call. And I think that whenever we're in the 6 to 14 minute range, I think of that as any one of us having a conversation with our neighbor for 10 minutes about transportation, or for 14 minutes about transportation. We could probably have a pretty robust conversation in 14 minutes and provide a substantial amount of information during that time. So that's to me a very good gauge of, regardless of how many people were on the call, how in depth were we able to share, and how much information you think we shared with them. So Those are where we stand now. And then again, our public review and comment period is slated to begin July 16th and run from July 16th to August 15th. And that's where we'll do another significant outreach in terms of letting folks know that those draft regional plans, the draft statewide plan, and the transit, regional transit appendix piece is also available for public review and comment. So we'll do a significant amount of outreach and email blasts and press releases, letting the public know that they can provide their comments on those documents. And so these are the remaining telephone town halls. When I sent out the packet, I think I sent out the packet the same day we were doing the District 11 town hall, which covered Eastern Colorado. So we have just the remaining District 8, District 7, and the 2 Denver Metro districts. So looking forward to those, I would like to take a moment to thank our RTDs and region staff in terms of all the hard work that they've put into making the telephone town hall successful. And it is a very fast paced. If you were so to sort of look behind the curtain or look behind the scenes as we're doing these, are pretty intense, because as the questions are coming in, we're going through, we're sorting, and we're developing responses for those. So would like to extend my thanks to all of our RTDs who've done a tremendous job, and our region staff, our planners and engineers, and environmental staff, and transit staff, providing great responses to the questions that we received. So with that, I will turn it right back over to Marissa for her to delve into the financial and budgetary items.
Thanks, Aaron. CDOT's mission is to provide the best multimodal transportation system for Colorado that effectively and safely moves people, goods, and information. So we oversee an annual budget of about $1.7 billion. And while this does seem large, and we sure have gotten a lot of questions about our budget at the telephone town halls so far, I think it's important to reflect here on the scale of CDOT's many responsibilities. CDOT is tasked with maintaining and improving a very vast transportation network that millions of people rely on every day, while also delivering on the priorities that we've heard from your communities around the state as part of this planning effort. So did want to spend a little bit of time here talking about our budget and how we could work together collectively to hopefully move the needle in funding some of our priorities. So if you want to go to the next slide. So the budget on the previous slide, the 1.7 billion is we're able to leverage that funding with enterprise funding. So CDOT is a coordinating partner to now 5 enterprises. I know STAC has received updates from we've been trying to give STAC updates on the enterprises throughout the year as well. But enterprises, again, are self-supporting government-owned businesses that receive revenue through usually user fees to advance a specific goal through a project selection process that's governed by each enterprise is governed by their own board of directors. So enterprise funding, again, provides the state with additional revenue, about $335 million in additional revenue annually. And the 5 enterprises are first the Bridge and Tunnel enterprise. That enterprise finances, repairs, reconstructs, and replaces designated bridges and tunnels in Colorado. Then we have the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, which develops and manages innovative financing for transportation projects. We have the Clean Transit Enterprise, which focuses on public transit and includes electrification funding grants. things like that for transit, and also aims to reduce environmental and health impacts related to oil and gas development. Then we have the non-attainment area air pollution mitigation enterprise, also referred to as NAPME. This enterprise supports projects that reduce air pollution and traffic in areas failing to meet air quality standards. And then last but not least, we have our fuels impact enterprise. I believe we got an update on that just last month, and that focuses on freight and fuel transportation projects. Do you want to go to the next slide? So this slide, there's a lot going on in it, but I think it's really cool. This is called a Sankey diagram for those who might not have seen this type of chart before. But it shows how, and Jeff, I think, has presented on this in different ways over the course of his budget updates. But this shows where CDOT's revenue is coming from. So our federal funds, our state gas tax and fees, and then it shows our 5 enterprises, and then from there it shows where those funds are allocated in the budget. So our largest program expenditure areas, when you look at all of those sources together, are capital construction. We put about over 805 million to capital construction projects in our 25-26 budget. And then our next largest program expenditure area is maintenance and operations at 431 million. And I think it's important just to look at how much money we're spending on maintenance and operations is like snow plowing. And we'll get an end of winter maintenance update from Sean Smith in a little bit. So he will talk to you about all of that they're doing for maintenance and operations, but it's a lot of work to keep our roads and open during weather events and things like that. So just wanted to show this slide, and we're going to kind of build onto it in my next slides, but if you want to go to the next one. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the 10-year plan works with our budget. So our current estimates of both state and federal funding for the 10-year plan for fiscal years, our new 10-year plan horizon will be from 2027 to 2036. We're anticipating about $225 million for each year of the 10-year plan starting in 2027. So we're estimating $900 million in strategic funds being available for the first 4 years of that plan, 2027 through 2030. And then our new out years, which will be 2031 through 2036, we're estimating about $1.35 billion to be available. And again, this is only, if you look back at that last slide, a portion of those funds. You want to go to the next slide. This slide shows just how those strategic 10-year plan funds, what our distribution targets are by CDOT region. We're using the same distribution targets as in the current 10-year plan, so we'll have good continuity with the projects that we've committed to in our current 10-year plan going into the new 10-year plan. If you want to go to the next slide. So this, so CDOT's 10-year plan again outlines our strategic investments in the state's transportation infrastructure over the next decade. So the 10-year plan is supported by state funding from Senate Bill 21-260 and federal funding sources. So if you compare this slide to the diagram that we went over in the previous slide, my goal with this slide was to show how the 10-year plan nests within our overall budget to stretch our budget further. It might be worth noting here that CDOT is primarily funded, while we do have the help and support of our enterprises, we're primarily funded by the state and federal gas tax, neither of which have changed over the last 30 years. And as I'm sure you are all aware, Colorado's gas tax of 22 cents per gallon has not increased since 1991, and nor does it increase with inflation. So this means that Colorado, I believe, has the 12th lowest state gas tax in the country. So what does that mean for us as staff members and at CDOT? Well, for one, I think it means that our planning process is incredibly important. This is why we need your input and the input of your communities, so that we can maximize our budget and make the most out of every dollar, so that we can meet our priorities, which are fixing our roads, advancing transportation safety, and improving mobility. If you want to go to the next slide. So how do we make the most out of every dollar? So we have to be really smart about leveraging all of our available resources, like combining traditional funding with our enterprise funding. So by leveraging those resources together, we can stretch our budget further and invest more in the projects, again, that fix our roads, improve safety, mobility, and our quality of life across the state. So our 10-year strategic plan, our 10-year plan, is really designed to do exactly that. It combines state, federal, and enterprise funding to maximize every investment, and then strategically align those resources as part of our larger overall budget and investment strategy. Go to the next slide. So in working with your communities and in hearing from the public via our telephone town halls that Erin just talked about, we get asked a lot of questions about how we fund specific things like asset management, transportation safety, freight, transit, and active transportation. So my next few slides were designed to be high-level overviews of different ways we can fund these types of projects. Again, recognizing that the 10-year plan is only part of our overall investment strategy, and that really to move the needle on funding our top priorities that we heard from you around the state, we'll need to be really smart about utilizing any and all funding available funding mechanisms. So I'm going to start with how we fund asset management and fix our roads. So first I wanted to say about this slide is I also wanted to start with an accomplishment here. So since the adoption of our current 10-year plan back in 2019, we, when we adopted that plan, had a strong commitment to asset management and fixing our rural roads. So in working on updating the statewide plan, we have looked at and touched about 756 miles of rural roads have been now improved through CDOT projects and maintenance in our current 10-year plan. So truly CDOT's first priority with our planning then, and it still remains in our planning now, is to fix our roads. And I want to be very clear about how CDOT is taking, and we're trying to really try very hard at CDOT to take a very aggressive approach to addressing the condition and quality of our roadway pavement and our other transportation assets. Our asset management budget is about $750 million annually. This does include the statewide bridge and tunnel enterprise. So the majority, almost 90% of that, goes to maintenance levels of service, pavement, and bridges. So, you know, and while that is a large portion of our budget, it's not enough. We have a lot of maintenance and asset management needs around the state. So that's, again, why we're really trying to use the 10-year plan to stretch that budget further, so that we can, you know, fix those potholes, resurface our roads, and make it safer to the traveling public. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay. I'm going to shift focus a little bit to talk about safety. So again, beyond the 10-year plan, there are many other programs out there that will fund safety, transit, freight, active transportation, and other transportation improvements. So this slide is designed to be just a very high level. Hopefully you can use it though as a resource. There's links that you can click on in this presentation that will get you more information about each of these funding programs. But many of these funding programs are eligible for local entities like Safe Routes to School, and some are exclusively for CDOT, like the Faster Safety Mitigation, and some are available to both locals and CDOT, like the Highway Safety Improvement Program. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I hope again that these will be good resources that maybe you could share with your communities or at your TPR meetings. If you want to go to the next slide. This slide looks at how we can fund freight. So have both CDOT managed grant programs like the National Highway Freight Program. We have enterprise grant programs, and then some federally managed grant programs like Build and Infra. You want to go to the next slide. This slide addresses transit. Again, CDOT managed grant programs. We have the Clean Transit Enterprise, and then federally managed grant programs through FTA. So a lot of your TPRs, you've seen transit plans be developed, and really the goal of those transit plans are so that your transit agencies will be eligible for federal FTA funds. If you want to go to the next slide. This is how some sources that we can fund active transportation. You'll see there's some overlap. You know, some of these funding programs can fund both transit and active transportation. But some good resources. Many of you might have seen this slide. We used this slide when developing our active transportation plan as well. If you want to go to the next slide. And then we have just, this one is sort of that other category, how there's off-system bridge, transportation demand management funding, electrification and energy, grant opportunities, aviation, and then research and innovation. We have the State Transportation Innovation Grant, the STIC, listed last. So a lot of great, I think we could spend an entire presentation probably talking through each and every one of these funding sources, but I think this is just to give you an idea of, how many sources of funding are out there, so that we can be thinking as a state, especially when you have your priority list now from each of your TPRs, what other ways we can work together to fund your priorities. Next slide. Brings me to the end, and I'll open it up for questions.
I do have a question. This is Holly. Sorry, having a hard time raising my hand. So, my question is, so a lot of these are grants, and at El Paso County, where I'm a commissioner, we have a really fantastic grant writer, but I know that for some of the rural counties and the rural TPRs, are we still offering grant writing assistance to them? Because if these are all grants that we can apply for, they may need some assistance in doing that. Is that still a program that's out there?
I think for many of our grant programs, yes, we do try to really offer that assistance. Depending on what you're looking at, I would say reach out to me, reach out to your region planner, and we can work with you to figure out what support we can provide. Because yeah, I know it's a lot.
Yes, it's a lot. As I say, we're very fortunate to have a really good grant writer at El Paso County, but someday she might retire too. So, it's just helpful for the smaller counties to have that assistance. Thank you.
Yeah, reach out to us early, and we can help you out. Figure it out.
Any other questions or comments from anybody on our planning process? Yeah, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't go my last STAC meeting without asking a question of Marissa. Thanks very much, Marissa. That really helpful overview of the funding piece. I guess the question I still think about is, from what you presented, it looks like the total funding available per year, including enterprises, is on the order of about $2 billion a year. 1.7 of sort of other funds, and then about $300 million a year of enterprise funds, and which is fantastic. The 10-year plan, sort of available resources that CDOT has identified, represents, in that case, then about 10% of the total statewide investments in the state's transportation system. I'm just thinking about how then can STAC, the regions, local jurisdictions work with CDOT to make sure that the collective investment strategies are really meeting the state's objectives and taking into account regional input when the 10-year plan is dealing with such a small fraction of the overall investments that are made in the transportation system.
Yeah, I think that was sort of my goal in this presentation, was to show that, you know, the 10-year plan can only do so much by itself, and that we need to be looking at our entire budget and all these different grant opportunities if we want to move the needle on funding our priorities around the state. And I would say first and foremost, our priority has been and remains to fix our roads. And we know that our asset management budget currently isn't keeping pace. So I think we as a state first need to recognize that and maybe take a, you know, I think CDOT has been trying to take a real aggressive approach to fixing our roads, but I think sometimes it's not the most glamorous thing to talk about, but that's, I think, where our investments probably are most needed in terms of, you know, just fixing what we have and bringing those, and that will improve safety and mobility. And maybe Jeff wants to add on to that, but yeah, I'll let Jeff add on to that.
No, I think you're good job, Marissa. And sorry, you guys are about a half hour ahead of schedule, so I meant to join for this presentation, but you're too efficient. Yeah, I think you're right. And to your question, Ron, I mean, depending on the year, you know, I think it's important to recognize that our capital construction budget is really only about 40% of our overall budget. So when you're talking about 2 billion, it's really you know, the bigger number in that actually is everything else. It's the maintenance and operations, it's the pass-through dollars to locals, et cetera. So I think the, you know, 40-45% that is capital construction, I think there is very significant and robust engagement with the planning partners. And so, you know, the 10-year plan, you are correct, is only a portion of that 40-45% that is capital construction. And it varies in different points in time. You know, it's a more significant or less significant proportion of that, depending on the amount of funding available. But, you know, as you know, outside of the 10-year plan process, there's the large, you know, the other large balance of dollars are the asset management projects. And you know, I think through the planning process, through the long range plans, through the TIP-STIP process, you know, there is a lot of engagement on those projects as well. But I think, you know, I think too, with this update to the 10-year plan, I think there is an interest in trying to sort of tell the story a little bit better about how all those pieces come together. Because you are correct that, you know, that there's a lot of focus on the list of projects in the 10-year plan. But it is not representative of all the funding sources that we have. So I think that as we work on the next 10-year plan, I think you're going to probably hear more from DTD about how we're going to kind of bring in more information on some of those other funding sources to provide more of a complete picture of what those other sources are, what those other projects are, and how they relate to each other.
No, thanks, Jeff, and Marissa, thanks for the follow-up. And just I think close out the point. I think you made my point for me. I think the state, the partners would benefit from a more comprehensive 10-year plan that showed all of the planned sort of priority investments, not just a fraction of the investments. And understanding operation maintenance is a little bit of a different animal, Jeff, understand that, but there's large capital investment projects that are planned to be implemented by CDOT, but aren't reflected in the 10-year plan. And so right now, I appreciate that you have thoughts about maybe in the next iteration trying to rectify that. Because right now, unfortunately, as powerful as the 10-year plan can be for the state and communicating priorities, it's not really a one-stop shop where the partners and the public can go to really see what the investment priorities and strategies are across the state.
Point.
I'd just like to comment on that point too. It seems like when the 10-year plan got started through legislation, we've focused mostly on that. We kind of lost what we used to do, we kind of planned all of the STIP stuff through the planning process, was kind of discussed through the planning process. And now it seems we're more just the 10-year plan and not the whole funding picture. So I do think we need to get back to including more of that discussion of how and what communities see as the top priorities for all the other maintenance projects and things like that on a statewide basis, and move a little bit away from being so focused on just the 10-year plan. And then we need to also be figuring out how to tell the story to the legislature of our funding shortfalls for the maintenance, operation, and asset management. We've kind of lost those talking points to even talk to the legislature, since CDOT hasn't been bringing those numbers forward as readily for us to discuss and carry forward for legislation and the public to understand the shortfall of funding. So, Eva.
I was just curious about the gas tax. I know, Marissa, you had said that it hasn't changed since 1997, I think you said. And I'm curious if there's ever been any sort of discussion about increasing that, or if it's, probably a sore subject. But I'm just wondering, if that's ever been brought up, or if there's, something that's like, hey, we like it where it's at, let's just leave it. And I guess I'm curious what other states have done, and if they were able to, if they did increase it, if it was able to, I'm sure, fund other things. But I'm just wondering what the, what are people thinking about that, or if there's been a discussion about that.
It's a tricky one. I don't know if Jeff, you want to speak to that, or someone on the inside, but.
I can hop in and help on that a little bit. So I think on the, you've got federal gas tax and you've got state gas tax. On the federal side, have not been successful in increasing the federal gas tax for quite some time. I think, and Jamie may have already talked to you about this, but I think in the current discussion on reauthorization, there's some discussion of additional fees. So there's some effort underway this go around to look at new revenue, but at the federal side, nothing has moved forward since the last increase in the 90s. At the state side, a lot of different states have increased gas taxes. Colorado has, through Senate Bill 260, did not increase gas tax, but did put in place some additional fees on gas and tax and diesel. So that's been sort of the way that was addressed in Colorado. I think prior efforts in Colorado to increase gas tax through a vote had not been successful. But I think relative to other states, there are quite a few states across the country more that have kept up, I would say, with gas tax over the years.
Paula, you had your hand up.
Yes, so on that same topic, Jeff and Marissa, does an increase in the gas tax require a Tabor vote? And do you think that the enterprise funds we've created are going to start covering some of our transportation needs? And then would there be any interest maybe in talking about trying to go to the ballot again for a dedicated sales tax towards transportation? Because, cars are becoming more efficient. So if you raise the gas tax, it doesn't do that much good if cars are becoming more efficient in running that way too. So I'm just curious if you've had any thoughts about that. I think Tabor's a tool. I always bounce around ideas, whether or not they're going to. I remember when the DRCOG, the one about 5 or 6 years ago, lost, and that surprised me because I thought it was very well done. So,
yeah, and I don't know if Emily is still on. If she has anything she wants to offer from a state perspective, but. Yes, I mean, I have not heard recent discussion, an increase to the gas tax itself would require a vote. I have not heard recent discussions. I think after, some failed efforts in recent years. I have not heard more recent discussions of going back for a vote, but doesn't mean that there aren't some discussions. I just don't think that I have not heard a lot of activity on that front.
Yeah, I think.
There, Emily, you're there. Great. You might have to be able to add a little more color on this.
Yeah, I know that there are a lot of advocacy groups that are interested in it. I don't know at what point they would go to the ballot. It would, you could either refer it as a ballot measure through the legislature and pass a bill, or you could go and collect signatures. But I do think, and I'd have to go back and look, but I think part of the negotiations with the oil and gas companies on SB 230 also created some standards that there wouldn't be a ballot measure in the next few years, that advocacy groups would pause on running any sort of legislation to raise the gas tax, because we enacted this new fee for unprecedented amount of transit funding. So there's also some pieces there. But Herman, I saw you had your hand raised. You might be able to give a bigger, broad picture.
Yeah, I guess not really, since Jeff and Emily did a real nice job answering the question. I'll just second it or third it that I have not heard of any real push to go to the ballot for either a gas tax or sales tax for general transportation at this point.
Okay, I just want to follow up. I'll get on my soapbox about RTAs again, because I know there's several throughout the state. Our Pikes Peak RTA actually dedicates 55%. It's a 1 cent sales tax, of which 55.55 cents of that, or whatever. I'm sorry, Jeff, I'm not as smart as you when it comes to numbers. And so 0.55 of that is going to go to new projects, which we list, which has been a very popular way to do this. And it's been passing with 80% of the vote down here. And then 35% goes to maintenance, and 10% goes to ongoing bus services with Colorado Springs Mountain Metro. So we've got, and those two things, the 10 cents for the Metro and 35 cents for maintenance, are permanent. And so those don't necessarily have to be renewed. Been very popular down here. I know I was talking to Weld County a couple days ago, and they want a presentation about that kind of thing. And I'm just finding with our state budget issues that, many of the regions might want to look, and this is just Holly on her soapbox, might want to look at that Rural Transportation Authority mechanism and find a way to do some of your own roads as it is. Now, we have two major roads, I-25 and Powers Boulevard, which are state highways, but we're even paying for some of Powers Boulevard out of the RTA to get it connected to go all the way around. But that whole thing could be bridged, and that's State Highway 21. So it's just a thought. I just wanted to express that to all of my transportation friends.
Okay, thank you. John.
I think, just if I remember correctly, the federal gas tax is like 20 cents a gallon, and the state of Colorado is 22. And if you realize that when SB 260 put the fee on it, I think when it gets to its maximum, it's an extra 8 cents, which would put us at, again, forgive the whole mixing the terms fee and tax, but we would have then an effective rate of 30 cents a gallon, which puts us into the top, like, I don't say top tier, but the top 40% of the 50 states, right? So it's not that we're not going to get there. When you look at that together, as far as what other states are doing, we would be rather competitive with that. But there is that sort of, again, what's the policy behind those dollars and where those dollars are going? So that's a wholly different sort of topic. So I think one thing that we can say is that as a whole, in the state of Colorado with SB 260, it's provided funding, but whether it's providing the funding for the things you want, that's a different policy discussion. So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there and make sure people realize that the funds are there, and when we get to the max amount, it will be competitive with where some other states are at.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the planning and financing? Okay. Not seeing anything, so I think we'll move on to winter maintenance update.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to get on the agenda with the STAC. Historically, this is a mid-year review. However, with my predecessor, John Lorme, departing end of January, this became a year-end winter after action review for the committee. And I'd be interested at the end of this or later down the road if the end of year works better, or if you would still like a mid-year moving forward. Joining me today, I have Jim Fox, who's the Deputy Director of Maintenance, and Nick Barlow, one of our meteorologists. And Nick is going to walk us through about 20 slides and be happy to entertain any questions at the end. So with that, Nick.
Thanks, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Yep, so this short presentation, it's a piece of our after action review. It's what I'm talking about today is largely a weather summary of what we saw last winter. And then I'll touch on a few things about the winter operations unit, some of the stuff we do here at CDOT. Okay, this is a basic summary of what we saw here. So here at CDOT, we number our large-scale winter storms. Not every snow event is a numbered storm. We typically want the storms to impact multiple maintenance sections at a time. There's certain thresholds that we use to number a storm. So we had 28 large-scale storms this winter. In this presentation, you see the smaller numbers in parentheses. That's what we saw last year for comparison. So 28 this year, that's right around average. Since I've been here at CDOT, my sixth winter, usually right around 30 winter storms. Of those 28 storms, the state was being impacted by a large-scale storms on 73 days through the past winter. And then this next metric is called the station average snowfall days. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but basically that's the average number of days that it was snowing at least a little bit throughout the state. So that was 109 this year, up quite a bit from 91 last year. A few point snowfall totals. Ski areas are easy to find how much snow they got throughout the year. You can see, Brackenridge, Copper, Loveland. Anytime we're getting above 300 inches of snow in the wintertime, that's pretty good. That's right around what you'd expect. It's nothing crazy. Then moving down this list here, DIA had 48 inches of snow. That's right around average. A little bit different, with the airport being so far east versus what you might actually see in downtown Denver. And then at the very bottom here, notice, Greeley and Fort Collins, less than 20 inches of snow on the whole year. Really dry year. Last year was dry up there, but this one is exceptionally dry. These two maps on the right, they show our two biggest storm events of the year. And if you've lived in Colorado, even just for a little bit, we typically have our mountain storms that come in from the west and favor the terrain. And then our other variety are these upslope storms that kind of wrap around the mountains and can bring heavy snow to the eastern half of the state. So our two biggest storm events of the year were actually one of each. This one in November, the 5th through 9th of November was a really big storm for the eastern plains, especially kind of that east-southeast plains. That's just an incredible amount of snow. Some of these little communities east of Pueblo, they saw a season's worth of snow with that single storm, and it happened in early November. And then for our mountains, the big one was President's Day week. It was kind of a combination of several storms, and of course it hits over a holiday weekend. Pretty heavy snow throughout all of our mountains and most of our higher valleys there. Next slide, please. Okay, I like to show this one here. This is a ranking list of cities in the United States greater than 100,000 in population. And then you can see that 5 of our cities scored in the top 25. We had a few in the top 10. Boulder typically finds their way into the top 5. Denver right out of the top 10. Pueblo at number 22 I don't think I've ever seen them on this list. Pueblo had a pretty decent winter, and it's actually kind of hard to get snow down into Pueblo there, just positioned on the Arkansas Valley there. Typically not a snowy place, but they did pretty well down there. Next slide. Okay, so this is a time series of when the storms hit, basically, beginning in October. We did get a couple storms in October, which we should, but it was a fairly slow start to the winter here. You can see in November here, we had a large pause in storms, and then especially much of December was dry around here, and then it really turned on for the holidays. We got in a pretty good groove for all of January and a good part of February here, and we stayed pretty consistent into March and April, but typically, you know, we get into the later part of April, it starts to peter out a little bit like you see here. Next slide. Okay, so this is that metric, the average snowfall days. So the average number of days where at least 1/10 of an inch of snow was measured by all of the stations in Colorado that measure snow. So we had, you know, we didn't have a huge amount of numbered storms, but this metric might be a little better here. You can see we had 109 snowfall days, which is actually the second highest that we've seen in this data set since 1975. The average is typically 83. So, you know, if you compare it to the average, we almost had an extra month of days when it was snowing. It may not be these big storm events, but, you know, from a CDOT maintenance perspective, even a little bit of snow, if it's cold enough, our maintainers need to get out there and we need to go do our thing. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one on the left, this looks at average temperature between October and May, and basically how did we compare to normal here? So you can see the eastern half of the state, most areas were a bit above average in terms of temperature, so kind of a little bit warmer winter. We did have our typical Arctic cold snaps that we usually get, you know, in January and February, but kind of a warmer winter. The western half of the state was a little bit mixed, kind of dependent on the mountain ranges getting snow, drier and warmer in the valley. I think if you average this data out for western Colorado, probably a typical winter in terms of temperature. This one on the right here is a similar map, but this takes into account precipitation. So this is both liquid, so rain and snow, so any type of precipitation. You can see the far western Colorado and especially southwest Colorado. That's where we saw the biggest precipitation deficits for this past winter. Quite dry in those areas. The central Colorado, you know, corridor here, kind of just that middle swath of the state. They're in that light tan, which is, you know, right around average. And then the eastern half, as you'd expect, that big November storm put much of the east and southeast plains way over the top for the year. And then again, drier as you move north of Denver towards the Cheyenne Ridge there. Next slide, please. Okay, similar map, but this deals with just snow. So percent of average on the left here. You can see, you know, that same pattern over east and southeast Colorado. Some of these areas were over 200% of average in the amount of snow they saw. And then moving towards Denver and especially north and east, a much drier winter. Western Colorado, largely below average. You know, some of these mountain ranges along the I-70 corridor ended up, you know, pretty typical for the time of year. But you do see those really big snowfall deficits down through the southwest zones, San Juan's, over towards the western slope as well. And this one on the right here, it's just basically total snowfall in inches and feet here. You can see that donut north of Denver on I-25, Greeley, Fort Collins, things like that, and then a healthy amount of snow, you know, 20 plus feet in our mountain ranges, which is a typical amount. Next slide, please. Okay, this ranks snowtel stations. Snowtel stations are these remote weather stations positioned in the mountains. They're federally run. Water managers use them a lot. We like to know how much water we have stored for the dry season here in Colorado to fill our reservoirs for drinking water, things like that. The highlighted stations in green, that's how well they scored, how well they ranked basically for period of record. So Jones Pass, that's just north of I-70, Echo Lake, they had their 12th and 14th snowiest winters at those stations there. There was one in the Bear River station, which is further west, actually had their third driest on record there. So quite a discrepancy. Moving into the central mountains, Porphyry Creek, that is just west of Monarch Pass, had their 8th snowiest winter on record. while Overland Reservoir, that's on the Grand Mesa, and then McClure Pass, much drier, first and second driest on record there. And then down into the San Juans, it's mostly bad news down there this year. Wolf Creek, and then some other Shark's Tooth and Middle Creek, that's further west into the San Juans. 5th, 3rd, and 7th driest winters on record at those stations. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this looks at the SNOTEL data for all stations throughout the winter. You've probably seen this chart before here. The black line is this winter, and then that green line is the middle, is the median, basically what we would expect. That early November storm made some noise on the graph here. You can see a big uptick in snow water equivalent. And then again for that Thanksgiving storm cycle, and then also for President's Day. You can see the black line kind of following, the average line, what we would expect, but we started to just kind of slow down, and we never really got back towards average. So as a statewide data set, we had a lower than average snowpack here. That green X in the middle is our typical peak snow, where we expect to have the deepest snow in the mountains. It occurs around the middle part of April here. So we had peak at the right time, but you can see really how far that black line falls off. We melted off really quick. We've got some good heat here, and despite snow in late April and even into May in the mountains, just those warm temperatures really put a hurt on our snowpack, and we melted faster. Next slide, please. I'll skip this one. Next one, please. Okay, just touching on our storm readiness calls. So when we have really big storm events that are going to impact large swaths of the state, we have big concerns about, we'll put together a statewide conference call. This stems off the Federal Highways Pathfinder initiative, if any of you are familiar with that. And we've kind of made it our own over the past few years. We started including external stakeholders, folks from really throughout the state. We get all of our statewide partners in, from public safety to State Patrol, the Avalanche Center, and then we also leverage our partners at the National Weather Service to provide their expertise as well. We had 9 of these calls this winter compared to 7 last year. A good chunk of them were in November, which was a snowy month here, and then at February, looking at that President's Day cycle, it was big enough, and it was a holiday weekend, that we had 3 calls for that one. The format of these is largely unchanged. One thing we started doing differently is, again, we leverage our partners at the Weather Service to give that statewide weather forecast, but now CDOT meteorologists are jumping in after that to provide a pavement impact forecast. So trying to add value to that weather forecast and really make this briefing transportation and CDOT focused. We also started having meteorologists on these Friday morning calls, basically in conjunction with our Traffic Operations Center in Golden, looking at traffic flows, events in the mountains, and then getting a forecast from a CDOT meteorologist headed into the weekend. Next slide, please. Okay, looking at the summer outlook here, this on the left is our current drought monitor. You can see really Western Colorado is starting to dry out pretty good. That red extreme drought continues to grow there. While the eastern half, we certainly have a fair amount of areas in drought, but there has been some improvement in the past few weeks with some of this late spring and early summer rain that we saw. As a whole, 61% of Colorado right now is currently classified in some level of drought, and that's up quite a bit from 41% that we saw last year at this time. This one on the right here is simply a drought outlook for the summer here, and long-term climate models based on current conditions suggest that drought is going to persist in Western Colorado and also potentially over South Central, Southeast Colorado as well. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a summer weather outlook for temperature. On the left here, June, July, August, the long-term climate models favor above average temperatures. Could end up being a hot winter here. Then on the, or I'm sorry, summer. Then on the right here, this is the 3-month precipitation outlook. Maybe equal chances, for precipitation here, potentially lower for the northeast part of the state. You see that green swath over Arizona and New Mexico. That's a good signal to see. Basically, this model is picking up on some form of a southwest monsoon pattern, setting up typically late July into August here. So hopefully we could see that creep in further north and offer some drought relief to west and southwest Colorado. Next slide, please. Wildland. So this is significant wildland fire potential outlook for June, July, and August. The only one to note here is June. There is an above normal risk for seeing a large wildland fire for the month of June right now, simply because it is so dry here. That red disappears as we move into July and August, potentially picking up on some relief relying from that southwest monsoon. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the El Nino forecast here. El Nino, La Nina is known as ENSO. That's the El Nino Southern Oscillation. That horizontal straight line in the middle is normal temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. Anything above that line to a certain threshold is the warm phase known as El Nino. The bottom is the cold phase known as La Nina. As these lines take off, these are different models with different ideas, but models seem to think right now we'll be in an ENSO neutral year. So not El Nino, not La Nina. That's what we were last year. Unfortunately, that doesn't shed a lot of light on what we might see for next winter. Often with a strong El Nino, sometimes our southwest zones can have a big winter. La Nina can sometimes favor our northern mountains, but with a signal like this, it's kind of anybody's guess, at least at this stage in the summer. Next slide, please. Then the all too early winter outlook, December, January, and February. The model right now suggests a warmer winter is possible or favored right now for southwest Colorado. In terms of precipitation, it suggests equal chances for above normal or below normal precipitation next winter. Next slide, please. So what do we do in the summer? So we do some convective and fire weather forecasting. Convective is thunderstorms, heavy rain, severe weather, things like that. So we ship that product out Monday, Wednesday, Fridays to our stakeholders here. This year we added a new tab to it for the heat risk. It's really designed for CDOT maintenance crews who are working out in the elements in the summertime, just to give them to an idea of what type of temperatures, humidity, and basically what type of stress that the heat will do to them throughout the day. This was suggested by a safety specialist here at CDOT, and I think it's a really good idea, just targeting our crews out there. Heat is certainly a dangerous hazard for sure, especially for folks who have to work long hours on the summertime for us. Next slide, please. Finally, for the weather side, so we issue fire and high wind warnings from the National Weather Service. That's because there's a procedural directive from CDOT, basically dictates the behavior of our maintenance crews when those products are issued. We provide training to various factions of CDOT in terms of any type of weather, hydrologic output. If we get into, the spring runoff is too much, we end up with flooding. Data requests, I get tons of requests for what happened last November. How much did it snow? What happened here? This is the weather unit here. It's headed up by Mike Chapman. He's the Winter Operations Program Manager, a meteorologist as well. Then myself, the statewide weather coordinator, and Brendan Eckerman, a new meteorologist who came on around the first part of the year. So now we have a crew of 3. Brendan works weekends, and then we overlap a little during the week. So our coverage is increasing in terms of weather support at CDOT. Next slide, please. Okay, a couple slides on the avalanche safety program. The left here, this is training, what we completed last year here. The big one is general explosive training. That's an 8-hour class held in Grand Junction. That's a big one. We had 70 attendees last year. We always do the Fort Carson Artillery School to work with the howitzer gun. And then a little bit more focused training called Train the Trainer for the howitzer. Looking ahead on the right here, this is what we have planned. We did complete helicopter mitigation on Independence Pass by May 12th. Some additional howitzer training, general explosives, artillery, and then hand charges. Basically, once the snow stops flying, the avalanche program jumps into gear, getting folks trained and maintaining that training throughout the winter and fall. Next slide, please. Okay, on the left here, looking back at total explosives used for avalanche mitigation last winter here. The big one, that turquoise color, that's gas exploder. So that is those rack systems, remote avalanche control. We've made a big push in the past 10 years to get more installations there. Right now, it's accounting for almost 50% of the explosives used over a winter season here. Some of the other ones that are big, case charge, that's an explosive as well. But the idea with these rack systems is to get off our dependence of artillery, basically, specifically the howitzer. We want to use these rack systems that are really advantageous in bringing avalanches down on our own terms. These systems allow us to reduce closure times. It's much safer than using propelled artillery, and also it takes far less resources to perform mitigation, get it cleaned up, and then open the highway back up. Then on the right, a couple metrics here. So we had over 500 natural and triggered avalanches in our highway paths. It's quite a bit. We did over 100 highway avalanche mitigation missions throughout the year. And then for those curious, closure time on our highways, performing mitigation, cleaning it up, around 79 hours. Next slide, please. Okay, state avalanche costs. 2025 was the lowest cost over the past 5 years, not by much here. 2013, that yellow bar was a big one here. But 2025 was probably fairly average, a little bit light, just because we did see a little bit less snow here. If you average out the past 5 years, we typically spend about $790,000 on avalanche costs each winter. Next slide, please. Finally, section avalanche costs. Durango, typically the highest. So that's performing maintenance on the many highway paths on 550 north and south of Silverton, and also 145 over Lizard Head Pass here. Then the Eisenhower Tunnel, protecting the tunnel there, Loveland Pass, some of the nearby paths on I-70, and then Grand Junction is third there, Alamosa, and then Craig with the smaller degree of mitigation they do up there. Next slide, please. And that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Any questions or comments? Interesting information. Thank you. Not seeing anybody with any questions, so. All right. Thank you. We'll look forward to the next update. Up next is rest area updates with Hope.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm sharing my screen or if.
Give me just a second, Hope. I got it
Okay,
up here.
thanks, Aaron. So this rest area update will be just a little bit different than the ones in the past. I think the rest area updates previously kind of focused on how we had gotten to the point of actually getting funding and becoming an asset. And this one will actually be good news and kind of give you an update of what we've been up to the last year and a half or so. Next slide. So I will give you guys just a really quick brief overview, go through our current and recently completed projects, our future projects, and then I'll have one slide about some challenges that rest areas continue to face. Next slide. So as you all might know, prior to 2023, the rest areas did not have a dedicated funding stream. The rest areas became the official 11th asset or 12th asset in 2018. However, due to the 5-year funding cycle, we didn't actually get our first set of funds until fiscal year 23. So we're really 2 years into having dedicated funds, and that's what we're mainly going to talk about today. The rest areas do share about $4 million annually over all 26 rest areas. About 15% of that is given to the regions for controlled and deferred maintenance to upkeep things like air conditioning and water heaters and fixtures and faucets and stuff like that. I do want to remind you that revenue generation at rest area is prohibited. We can't compete with gas stations or other commercial establishments. And I do want to mention also that we have three welcome centers that we manage together with the Colorado Tourism Office, which is located within the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. Next slide. Again, this is a slide that I've repeated through the years, but it is worth sharing. Prior to 2016, we had 33 rest areas, or 2008, I'm sorry, we had 33 rest areas. There were several rest areas that were closed through the mid 2010s, resulting in us having 26 rest areas currently. Our forecast is that we will likely close the northbound and southbound Pueblo rest areas, which will bring us down to 24, and that'll happen in 2028. And then when we open the new Pueblo rest area, which will combine the northbound and southbound lanes, that will bring us up to 25 rest areas statewide. Next slide. Here's just a quick overview of our current inventory of the 26 rest areas. I'll go into more detail as we go through the slides regarding the rest areas that are closed and the rest areas that have future closures planned. Next slide. So the currently completed projects, or the recently completed projects, again, this is how we used our asset management money. And I'm not quite sure why the Holly photos rotated. You'll just have to use your imagination, but those shouldn't have been in that way. But anyway, Edwards, we completed exterior lighting. We also added metered water at the RV dump, and this was important because as RVs would move it or would go into that rest area to use our RV dump for their waste, they could take on unlimited gallons of water, and some people were abusing this. So now they're limited to 15 or 20 gallons. So we're hoping to see a savings, just from the operating perspective with that. Colorado City, we completed some flatware repairs, and then we put in a whole new HVAC system. And then Holly, we did a whole gut that is brand new, basically on the inside, made it ADA compliant and new MEP as well. Next slide. Nearing completion, we have the Araba rest area. This is our second busiest rest area in the state. This again was a full gut on the interior, and this was necessitated by some faulty plumbing. The plumbing had been leaking throughout the years, and it actually caused some structural repairs. It leaked onto our steel joists and our steel floor, or the floor decking, and caused some rust. So we had to get all of that remediated, which required, of course, taking everything out. There on the left, you can see a picture of the restroom ready to go for new partitions and new fixtures. So we're hoping that one wraps up actually this month. Virginia Dale is getting a new leach field, and Sterling is getting new exterior lights. Hopefully those will be done this summer, early fall. Next slide. And then the big one that we have, of course, going on right now is Vail Pass. Vail Pass is the busiest rest area in the state. I've presented on this one in the past, but this one is just an entire new rest area, from the building to the site to the entrance. Everything is being replaced. We're tripling our parking. We're tripling the restroom facilities in the building, new wastewater treatment, new freshwater treatment. Of course, we're adding the interpretive elements. We have a Forest Service building, new maintenance path, relocated bike path. There you can see several pictures before, during, and after. We're hoping that this one is done late this summer. We're pushing really hard for end of July, August. And the total cost on that one is $24 million. Next slide. Another project that is coming up that's near term, this one, the rest area is now officially closed for demolition, is the Shaw Creek rest area. Again, this one is going to be a full remodel. The original building was built in 1968. We're replacing it with the building that you see there. Again, that's just a prototype. The great news about the Shaw Creek rest area is that this building that you see here, this floor plan, is one that we're going to duplicate across any other rest areas as they're replaced. So we should have some cost savings by having a prototype floor plan. And you'll also notice the benefit of this floor plan is that it has an integrated maintenance garage, so that maintenance staff can store either lawn equipment or snow removal equipment in there. And just, I think it makes things more efficient, and it cuts down on the number of buildings that we have on each rest area site as well. And this one, we're hoping that we can be completed on it by next spring. Total cost of this one is $4.5 million. Next slide. Again, another future project, near term though, is the Fruita Welcome Center. I mentioned earlier that we work with OEdit on our welcome centers. OEdit is actually financing this, but CDOT is managing the remodel, the design, and the construction. OEdit actually received some funds to redo this rest area, and their goal is to really create a prototype that they can repeat across their other welcome centers in the state. So they would like to duplicate this design at Burlington and Julesburg, which are the other two that they have with us. So this one, again, it's a full remodel. It's a little bit more than Araba because they are, kind of pulling in the branding and the interactive experience. So, and then there will also be some landscaping and some signage and some play areas. And then finally, some other projects we have coming up are Rifle and Fruita. We're going to duplicate the watering meter system at the RV dump. And then Trinidad is going to see a complete HVAC replacement, xeriscaping, and that timeline is looking for, we're looking at 2027 for that one. Next slide. So I mentioned this earlier, but we are planning a new rest area at exit 108 in Pueblo. This one will take the existing northbound and southbound rest areas, see those closing, and then combining them into one rest area at exit 108. The benefit of this project is that we're working hand in hand with the region on an underpass project. So, we can serve 2 lanes of traffic from this building instead of having one building served northbound and southbound, if that makes sense. So there will be some cost savings as far as operational. But the most important thing is that there will be an interchange now at Purcell, which is very much needed. I can't speak much about the interchange project, but I can tell you that we're working closely with them to make sure that our projects wrap up together and that we're coordinating on, design and placement and those pieces. So we're hoping that we can have that construction completed by 2028, but we are actively in the land acquisition process. Pueblo West Water has agreed to give us water and sewer, which is essential. If you recall, that is what ended up closing the old rest area. It was kind of the demise of the other two. And then we're also starting actively planning for the replacement of 3 of the rest areas in Glenwood Canyon. Those rest areas, they were built in the 80s. They're definitely beyond repair. However, first step for that is to complete the context sensitive solution process. So we're going to do that for all 3 of those this year. Next year, we're going to complete the design, and then we're going to do no name in 27. So we'll tear it down, build a new one. Then 28 and 29, we'll do Grizzly Creek and Bear Ranch. And total estimated cost for all 3 of those right now is around $21 million. So obviously that'll take multiple years of funding from our $4 million asset management budget. Next slide. Some rest area challenges. I mentioned it earlier. Prior to 2023, we didn't have dedicated funding source, resulted in a lot of our buildings, having requiring major repairs, as you kind of saw with Araba. We have multiple failing assets at each rest area. This is true for Glenwood Canyon, especially. We have wastewater treatment facilities that are failing along with the buildings. I mentioned it earlier as well that the distribution of our $4 million budget is $600,000 to the regions for upkeep and then 3.4 for major repairs. A lot of our major repairs, as you can see by our budget, or by the cost of the cost that I mentioned previously for some other major renovations, takes more than one funding year. And so we're just, it takes us several years sometimes to compile the money to get, one full rest area replaced, if that makes sense. But with all those challenges, I think it's fair to say that we're very committed to developing a sustainable rest area program, and that we really have a desire to preserve the CDOT's network of rest areas. Next slide. I think that's it, actually. I don't have a question slide, so any questions?
Vern.
Yeah, I was curious what is going to happen with the old rest areas by Pueblo.
I am not 100% sure. I know that Shane and the regions have been working through that with the executive management team. So I'm not sure exactly when, if those buildings will just be demoed and maybe the parking will be reserved for freight parking. At this point, I don't know that that has been determined.
Yeah, this is Shane Ferguson here, Region 2.
Thanks, Shane.
Yeah, so we will end up demoing those buildings. As far as the parking lots themselves, that is in discussion at this time. And we'll continue to kind of work. It could be a possibility for freight parking, but that's definitely, there's a couple of items there we want to continue to work through in those issues.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you. That was a lot of good information and update on seeing progress on improving our rest areas. Thank you. Okay. Up next is our MMOF funding update. Michael.
Good morning, everybody. And Aaron, if it's all right. Oh, it looks like you're already sharing. Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to take a few minutes here to get back to our STAC members here and talk about MMOF and all the things that are underway. We've had a lot of different conversations with TPRs, with various awardees. So lots of different questions and FAQs have come up. So I'm just going to take a few minutes this morning to kind of walk through again what we're doing here and clarify some of those FAQs and give us all an opportunity to make sure we're understanding what the challenge is ahead for everybody as you all have to sort of lead the reconciliation of your awards. So go ahead, Aaron. Next slide. So again, just as Emily summarized for us, our legislature's take back was a reduction of existing funds in the amount of $71.4 million from the local MMOF fund balance. And what that means is that it had net reductions to existing allocations as they'd been provided to all the TPRs previously. The effect was essentially eliminated all the previous 2025 and 2024 allocations and some reduction of the 2023 allocations. So the result there means that because some, and in some cases all of those previous allocations had been awarded to projects or programmed to projects, the big challenge here is to now make modifications to the awards to get back into constraint with these new reduced allocations. And just to be clear that because there is confusion sometimes, these decisions are still the purview of TPRs and MPOs. As the awarding agency, it is now ultimately your responsibility to then see through the modifications of those awards to get back into constraint. And it's not an easy task. So we're working very closely with you, and CDOT is supporting you through all that. Next slide. So just to talk about responsibilities, the obvious is that it's up to the TPR to be leading, as you led the original award making decisions, you now need to be, leading this process again to make the adjustments. And we just want to talk about, the importance of that being transparent and inclusive, to be coordinating with your local agencies, your TPR members, and the local agencies that are awarded in your decision making. And that's key simply because, this is a sensitive issue. There will be impacts to some of those local agency awardees. And, it needs to be a collaborative and cooperative conversation ultimately to get to sort of a mutual agreement about how adjustments will be made. CDOT staff's responsibility, it is our program and we know it's complicated. So we're here to provide all the guidance we can possibly give you, develop tools to support you in this process and support for you. We're most familiar with the actual projects and where they are in their progress. So we're providing you project information, including where they are in their contracting, what kind of contractual commitments exist, where have they made expenditures, and what are the planned implementation schedules. So what I mean is, where is a particular project in implementing the multiple phases of a project, and what are their current planned schedules. That's all critical information for you to make good decisions. And so we're advising on those decisions, and we will make suggestions to the TPR and MPO where it's needed in terms of, how to make the adjustments. To an extent, we're avoiding saying, oh, we think you should do this and do that. We're not going so far as to to push that. It really is your authority to do so. But some TPRs have clearly said, look, we need recommendations from you, and we just want to be open in that conversation. So as you work through it, just let us know where more input is needed. Next slide. Now, are there any questions? I thought I heard a ping, but I will keep going if not. Okay. So you've seen this table before, and I wanted to put it up here. This is sum total numbers statewide. I'm sharing this table again because you're being provided with a similar table just for your TPR, just for your region. And I want to make sure it's clear what this table implies. So in the top line, these are the amounts that are now your new annual allocations. And you'll see that 24 and 25 are now zeros, and 23 will be a reduction from what had been previously awarded. The next line showing the currently awarded amounts. These are the amounts that the TPRs and NPOs have awarded to projects. You've made commitments of them, and they are greater than the new allocations. So where they are over-programmed is now in the red numbers there, showing the amounts that are over-programmed. So the task at hand is to now address those over-programmed amounts by either delaying them and backfilling them with some of the available funds that you have in 26 and beyond, or in some cases, some TPRs and NPOs actually have to make some delays, and they have to make some total reductions or even full cancellation of some awards because of just basically how far along they are in their programming. One TPR may have made almost no awards of FY24 and 25 and beyond, and therefore they have a lot less to adjust. And other TPRs and NPOs had made awards all the way out through FY28. So there's a little bit more to be done. So everybody's in a unique situation. And so now we'll kind of talk a little bit more on the next slide about how do we go about that, and just some pointers and clear up some FAQs. Next slide, Aaron. Okay. So the approach we are taking, and that we are supporting and helping our TPRs make, is to make these adjustments in a way to operate in a competitive manner, meaning where there's going to be impacts to projects. We do want to be cognizant of the fact that awards are made in a competitive manner, and therefore reductions and impacts should also be considered in a competitive manner. But that is not the whole picture when we have projects that are in different stages of implementation already and different stages of whether or not they're under agreements, IGAs and grant agreements. So to start, where you're just making delays of existing awards and you're not considering a reduction or a cancellation, the approach to take is to look at amounts that are not yet encumbered or given a notice to proceed in their project implementation. Those are the low-hanging fruit, I want to say, that you can now adjust by moving them to future years. These are low-hanging fruit because it can be easily done in your portfolio of awards, but it doesn't even require contract changes on CDOT's behalf. So as an example, just a fictitious project, let's say, had a $1 million NMOF award, and $200,000 for it is already encumbered in a design phase, and that phase is underway, and they have made some or maybe all of the expenditures, but no construction phase is actually started, and we haven't encumbered it and given the notice to proceed to do so. That's a simple dollar amount. You can look at postponing that $800 portion to a future year, and it doesn't require any contractual changes. And then ultimately, the delays you put in place, you want to try to keep them in the earlier years in your FY26 and beyond, to try to minimize any potential impact to whatever project implementation schedules the awardees had originally. Now, I talked about this last month, and it's a complicated exercise and complicated topic, and that is that CDOT is now implementing with MMOF a cash management approach that will allow projects to move ahead when they're ready by advancing up to 2 years of their future awards. So as an example, if a project had intended to go to construction in FY26, and now the TPR has to move its award funds out to 27 and 28, we can still allow that project to proceed in 26 by advancing the commitment of future awards. We're confident we can support all the projects that are in this position. That is, projects that had intended and were already slated to go to advertising and get a notice to proceed in FY26. We can accommodate those schedules by advancing 27 and 28 funds. We'll continue to do that next year into 27 and into 28, meaning projects that are ready to implement in 27 will advance 28 and 29 funds as long as we're still able to do so based on the current balance of unencumbered funds in that fiscal year. So that's all very complicated. The takeaway here is that we can support all encumbrances, advances for planned advertisements this year, meaning this season, I should say, but we can't promise that next year. We'll do so as much as we can, and in the future, in the coming weeks and months, we'll be able to start foretelling, a year ahead of time, how much we can actually advance. So what this means to you all as your TPR leaders is that you have to make delays to some awards, but it doesn't mean that causes a delay for implementation to every project. And this is where the coordination with CDOT staff, the region staff, and the project managers who are familiar with the individual projects, this is where we're working with you to help you understand where those adjustments can be made without impact, and when it may ultimately require a schedule impact to the projects. Okay. a lot there. I know there's a lot of questions probably because that is a complicated measure. So anyway, all right, next slide. Now we want to talk about where you're ultimately having to make actual reductions to existing awards or cancellations of those awards. Not all of you are in this position, as I mentioned, so it may not be relevant. Again, we want to minimize contractual risk and financial impact as much as possible. And what that means is, again, you can first consider projects that don't even have an agreement in place, right? They're the least they've made the least amount of progress towards implementation, so much so that there is no agreement in place. If you had to make a reduction or a cancellation, that's easily done because we don't have to do any contractual changes or anything. Again, it's really key here to lead a transparent and cooperative process. And I say this because you may be making contract reductions and cancellations of projects that are under contract. And the best avenue to, the best result is where a TPR has a participative process, and those local agencies that are affected, even though they certainly aren't going to like that they may have to face a reduction or a cancellation, that they are at the table with you and arrive at that conclusion with you, so they're accepting of it. And the reason is, if there's funds in an IGA, we have to do an amendment to that IGA, and that requires both CDOT's signature and the local agencies. And so we're all kind of in this process to hopefully reach a mutually agreeable reprogramming of the funds without it spinning out of control with objections or challenges to that in a contractual way. One point, the last bullet on this slide, want to point out that partial reductions should be avoided when you can. Why? Because a partial reduction may ultimately mean that you've now left a part of an MMOF award in a project that is not fully funded, and now they have to wait even longer to get the funds put to use. And of course, we are in this situation because of how long it takes to program and spend funds, and we are trying to be more efficient about that. So in any way you can, avoid partial reductions and instead look at full cancellations instead of sort of spreading out the reduction across a bunch of projects. Next slide. Okay, so I guess we're to the end here. We can take a discussion. I do want to let everybody know that later today we've finalized a sort of a guidance document that I'll share with everyone that gives an overview of why we're in this position, what is being done, what the TPRs are doing, how adjustments are being made. And it has some FAQs that talk specifically to what I've talked about today. Some local agencies have asked for this sort of overview so that they can take it back and talk with their electeds and that sort of thing. So that'll be coming out later today, and you can watch for that. Please share that with your local agencies when it's received. Okay, so questions and discussion.
Any questions from anybody? Hey, John.
Yeah, I'll ask a question since nobody else is. So, Michael, I don't know if this is a you question or it's an Emily question or a Herman question, but obviously, when we had the state update earlier, they're like, yeah, next year is going to be even worse. So moving forward, I'm telling my folks, hey, spend your money as fast as you can. But again, the way transportation works is just, you need to get your clearances, you need to do this, you need to do that. And I'm just hoping that, is there a way we can get ready for what's going to happen next legislative session? Any way we can make sure that any projects that survived this bloodbath can continue on next session? And I don't know if there's a great answer to that, but I think if the answer is that we all just need to sort of chat with our legislators, I'd like to sort of plant that seed now and have everyone start chatting. But what do you guys think? Is there a good answer to that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different facets to what you're talking about, John, and thank you for the question. First off, and someone from DRCOG could attest to this, is that when your award decisions are made in a competitive manner, which means you've had an evaluation based on identified criteria, you've scored them, compared them to one another, prioritized them, and then made your award decisions accordingly, that is a defensible process that also supports you when you then have to suddenly pull back on them. You have a defensible process to do so. And you can say, well, the funding is reduced, and therefore these awards were made, competitively, and we can simply move the threshold up or down, however you want to describe that. It's important to be able to defend your pullback, your reductions and cancellations in that way. Fortunately, very little of this has to be done this time, but you're right. If there's another pullback of more funds next year, it's going to be a different situation, right? We're all going to be in a more challenging situation, including having to maybe pull back funding from projects that are maybe already had a notice to proceed, but we literally have to issue some stop work orders and say, don't sign that consultant contract and start anything, right?
Right.
We're trying to avoid those. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question is not to get the jurisdictions mad that we're taking away the money. Do you have any suggestions on how we can get the legislature to not come back to this crop again next session?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other piece of this. I will just say that in some of the conversations I've had with TPRs and MPOs, no, not some of them, every single one of them has said, wait a minute, should we really be awarding our funds all the way out through 28 if there's a chance of losing them? And it's a double-edged sword. If we hold back, that means we're going to arrive in 28 and 29, and we're not going to have the ability to spend the funds. The best way to assure that we don't lose any more funding is to get the funds spent or fully committed, right? So we can, Jeff's team, when they spoke with the JBC, they had to talk them back from a much greater number, much larger dollar amount that the legislature wanted to take. But they were able to say, look, we have contractual commitments. You're talking about forcing the state into risky contractual situations if we are pulling back funds that are fully committed and encumbered. So we want to be in that position as much as we can. And so our only approach here that's safe and effective is to charge forward based on what we have now.
Hey, Ron.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely share some of John's concern about future years, and if the state budget situation doesn't improve, that the situation might be even worse. But appreciate your counsel, Michael, about also not want to continue to put ourselves at risk. I mainly just wanted to express appreciation on behalf of Dr. Cog and our staff, Michael. I know it's not been fun for anyone, including you, but have appreciated the open line of communication and trying as best as we can to get timely information so that we can at least make informed decisions and figure out how we're going to proceed at least. So just wanted to appreciate you and your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Herman, did you have a comment?
I did. I think Michael handled it well. I'll just summarize: the best way to keep the money is get it spent. And one of the reasons the legislature took that action is because we had the large unexpended balances. So drawing that down will help us with the argument for keeping the funds.
Agreed. So, okay. Any other questions, comments on MMOF? Okay. Don't see any other comments. Any other business to come before the group? We need to talk about our July meeting. It's scheduled for July 3rd. What's the group's pleasure? We could try to change that to July 10th. Or do we want to stay on July 3rd? Any input, Aaron?
Yeah, I would highly recommend moving it. Just my opinion. I don't think participation would be very good on July 3rd. And we can, I do recognize that there is a Northwest TPR conflict if we were to move it to the following Thursday. There is also the possibility exists that we could move it to Friday the 11th. So definitely open to suggestions.
Could do a barbecue at my place as offered as an alternative to me here on chat. So I guess what's the group's pleasure? The 10th work better for people. We'll be by Zoom, so we don't have to travel, but
yeah.
Holly, you're on mute.
Well, you know, sometimes I say dumb things, so I keep myself on mute. I will say the 10th, Thursday, July 10th. So we stick with the Thursday morning still, because I will not be, I'll be thinking about the 4th of July on the 3rd. So
I'm seeing comments come through on the 10th, so unless there's a strong opposition to going to the 10th, I think that's where we'll go. Ron?
Yeah, Chair Beatty, just wanted to note that conflicts with the statewide MPO meeting. So just a cascade effect that statewide MPO meeting will have to be adjusted. So leave that up to CDOT staff to figure out how to deal with that conflict, but probably makes sense not to meet on the 3rd.
what time is the statewide MPO meeting at?
They start at 8:30.
And do they go, how long do they go?
2 hours.
So maybe we should do the 11th. Do you guys mind doing meetings 2 days in a row? Because if you have a statewide MPO meeting, that takes away all but 5 of our participants. So
we would then have to reschedule the statewide MPO. We wouldn't have anything like that with STAC. So
Would we be able to do a 10 o'clock stack? Just do it after MPO? And just have a shorter meeting. We haven't been using our full allotted time, so I think we could probably adjust our agenda. I don't see July being a huge meeting either, so.
yeah, I think that we just do a 10 and we just, you know, run right into after the MPOs are done, we can start the stack at 10 a.m.
If that works.
If you want to do a thumbs up and or some kind of reaction, I see the or head nods, and
Ron's
thumbs up.
okay. Is there anyone opposed?
Yeah.
I am opposed. The Northwest TPR is set for 9 a.m. that day. Can we do 11 a.m.?
11 to 1 maybe or something. I don't know.
That would work for me.
That works for me.
That way we wouldn't crowd the MPO if that works for people. Getting okay. I think we'll plan on doing 11 to 1
11 to
on
1
on the 10th. Unless we hear opposition. Not hearing anything, so I think we can make that work. Moving a meeting is always risky because we may lose somebody. So, but I think that works for most everybody. So we'll go with that. We'll go 11 o'clock on the 10th of July.
on the 10th. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll see you all on July 10th. Everybody have a good 4th of July, and we'll see you on the 10th. Is there anything else from anybody? Okay, seeing none, thank you. And good luck with all your future endeavors, Ron. We'll miss you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.